At exactly 10:17 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday, Otis Carter, a 68-year-old janitor, set down his mop and calmly walked into the executive boardroom of Sterling Corp. The room full of high-level executives erupted in laughter the moment they saw him. To them, he was just the aging black janitor. Nothing more. "Lost your way, old man?" Ryan Sterling joked, smug in his tailored suit and cushioned by a Harvard MBA and a last name he wore like armor. But Otis didn't flinch. Instead, he slid a document across the long mahogany table. The room fell silent as the men leaned in. The laughter died instantly. The paper in front of them confirmed what none of them had even considered. Otis Carter, the man they passed in the halls, the man who emptied their trash, was actually the majority shareholder of Sterling Corp. For decades, he'd let them see only what they wanted, a humble janitor, invisible and beneath them. But all along, Otis had been watching and waiting. And now, as 400 employees faced layoffs due to the executives' poor decisions and shady financial moves, Otis was ready to reclaim what was his. Before we dive deeper, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next episode is one you won't want to miss. Earlier that morning, the building had been still, the only sound that of Otis's footsteps echoing down the hallways. He pushed his cleaning cart slowly, his hands rough with time and labor. The company wouldn't officially wake for another 2 hours, but Otis had always preferred the peace of dawn. In those quiet hours, he could think clearly. He could remember. He paused outside the executive suite. The nameplate on the door gleamed. Ryan Sterling, CEO. Otis smiled to himself as he slipped the key into the lock and stepped inside. The office was pristine, like a showroom instead of a workspace. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the skyline like a trophy. Otis moved with care, emptying the trash without disturbing a thing. His gaze landed on a framed photo, Ryan and his father, Thomas Sterling, grinning at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. But Otis remembered that day, and he remembered who stood just outside the frame. He wiped the photo's glass gently, his reflection ghosting across it. Thomas Sterling had once promised Otis the world, told him they'd build the company together. But promises fade, especially when they come from men who don't see you as an equal. Otis was never offered a seat at the table, only a mop in his hand. Just then, footsteps echoed behind him. He turned and nearly bumped into Patricia Wilson, head of HR. She jumped slightly, then rolled her eyes when she realized who it was. "It's just you, Otis." "Morning, Miss Wilson," Otis said, his voice soft but never small. Patricia barely looked up from her phone. "Since you're here, the executive bathroom needs attention. Someone said there were water spots on the mirror." Her tone sharpened. "And please use the right cleaner this time. Last week's smelled off." Otis nodded quietly. "Yes, ma'am." She stepped past him, heels clicking, but paused at her door. "Also, the closet on the 3rd floor still smells like someone's eating lunch in there. We've had complaints. Find somewhere else." She disappeared into her office without another word. Otis stood there for a moment, absorbing it all. And the way they talked to him, looked past him, as if his decades in that building meant nothing. But what they didn't know was that Otis Carter had been preparing for this day for a long time, and he was done letting them walk all over him. What happens next? You won't believe it. Stay tuned. Otis stood quietly in the hallway, his face calm, though his eyes tightened just a bit. Behind that stillness was a weight he carried every day. The 3rd floor closet, the one Patricia complained about, was his only private space. A narrow, little room where, for 30 peaceful minutes, he could sit, eat, and breathe without judgment. There was a cafeteria, sure. But the last time Otis had tried to sit there, Ryan Sterling had made a snide comment loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's keep the help separate from the talent." Still, Otis didn't let it show. He straightened his shoulders and pushed his cart toward the executive bathroom. 20 minutes later, as he finished polishing the last mirror, the door swung open. 2 young executives strolled in mid-conversation, barely acknowledging Otis. I'm telling you, Brad, the old man's lost it, the taller one said. Last quarter's numbers were a disaster, and now he wants to lay off 15% of the staff. Lower-level folks only, I assume, Brad replied, adjusting his tie in the mirror Otis had just cleaned. Naturally. Can't cut the decision-makers. The first man laughed. Then he noticed Otis and lowered his voice, but not by much. Speaking of which, how old do you think this guy is? Isn't there some kind of age limit for pushing a mop? Brad smirked and glanced at Otis in the mirror. Maybe he just can't afford to retire, or maybe he loves the smell of bleach. Then he turned to Otis directly. That right, old-timer? Otis didn't react. He kept wringing out his cloth with steady hands and replied, "Bathroom's clean, gentlemen." His voice was calm. "Controlled. Thank God for small mercies," the first man muttered. "At least they still know how to follow orders." As Otis moved toward the door, Brad stepped into his path, forcing him to sidestep. "Oh, and someone spilled coffee in the conference room. Be a good boy and take care of that, would you?" The words dripped with condescension, the phrase boy landing with familiar weight. Otis didn't flinch. "Yes, sir," he said, steady and sure. "Right away." The rest of the morning was more of the same. A female executive held her nose as Otis passed by, loudly whispering about that smell. Two managers fell silent the moment he entered their office to vacuum, eyes tracking his every move like he might pocket a stapler. An intern bumped into his cart without apologizing, then snapped, "Watch where you put that thing." Each moment was small on its own, a whisper, a glance, a tone, but added together they became a flood of everyday disrespect. It was a current Otis had swum against for most of his life. By noon, Otis made his way to the third-floor closet, his quiet refuge. He pulled out a folding stool hidden behind the shelves and sat down slowly, knees creaking. From his old leather lunch bag, he unwrapped a simple sandwich and poured coffee from a thermos. The smell of industrial cleaner surrounded him, but he hardly noticed. His mind wandered back to a different time. He had been a young man then, barely 30, working nights at a small, scrappy startup founded by a man named Thomas Sterling. Back then, Sterling Corp was just an idea and a few rented offices, and Thomas wasn't like his son. He knew Otis's name, asked about his family, treated him with dignity. Otis remembered one night in particular. The company was close to collapse. Bills stacked high. Thomas was alone in his office, head in his hands. Otis had quietly brought him a cup of coffee. One thing led to another, and they talked. Otis, shyly, had shared a dream, how he'd saved money over the years to start his own business someday. Thomas looked up, eyes lighting up with a spark of inspiration. "You know what, Otis?" He said, "I'd rather have one honest partner than 10 rich sharks." But that dream had faded. Suddenly the door swung open, flooding the small space with fluorescent light. Ryan Sterling stood in the doorway, his suit crisp and his expression sour. "So this is where you hide?" he said, wrinkling his nose. "Didn't Patricia talk to you?" "We've had complaints." Otis stood quickly, tucking away the last of his lunch. "Sorry, Mr. Sterling, I was just finishing up." Ryan's eyes narrowed as he spotted the stool and the worn lunch bag. "Is this some kind of living situation I should know about? Because I'm pretty sure that breaks at least a dozen health codes." "No, sir," Otis said quietly, the heat of embarrassment rising in his chest. "Just my lunch break." "Well, take it somewhere else." And with that, Ryan turned and walked away, leaving Otis alone once again. But Otis didn't lower his head. Not this time, because what nobody knew, what none of them had ever bothered to ask, was that Otis Carter wasn't just the janitor. He was also the man who owned the building. And soon, the truth would come out. Ryan didn't even look back. "Preferably outside the building," he said, waving his hand as if Otis wasn't a man but a problem to be dealt with. "This isn't a homeless shelter." His eyes flicked over Otis's worn uniform before adding, "Though I can see how you might get confused." Before Otis could say a word, Ryan's phone rang. He turned away, already lost in conversation. Make sure this closet is cleared out by the end of the day. He tossed over his shoulder, disappearing down the hall. Otis stood still for a long moment, the weight of the words pressing on his chest. The anger didn't boil over. It didn't explode. It just burned, low, steady, familiar. He packed his lunch away with slow, deliberate hands, folded his small stool, and wheeled his cart toward the basement locker room. The room was empty. Echoes of quiet filled the space as Otis made his way to his locker, a dented old metal box tucked away in the farthest corner. He spun the combination like he'd done 1,000 times. Inside hung a spare janitor's uniform. But what mattered? Sat on the shelf below, a battered leather briefcase. It didn't belong in a room like this. He carried it to the bench and opened the latches. Inside were documents, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves, share certificates, contracts, letters, and at the very top, one paper that made it all real. A certificate showing Otis Carter owned 51% of Sterling Corporation, signed by Thomas Sterling himself. Beside it was a letter, old and yellowed but clear. Otis, my friend. Without your faith and your investment, Sterling Corp would never exist. I know you want to stay in the background, and I'll respect that. But these shares speak for you. One day, when it's time, they'll remind everyone who really built this company. Thomas Sterling Otis had kept that promise to Thomas. Stayed quiet, stayed loyal, first out of respect for the man. Then, after Thomas's sudden death 15 years ago, out of shock, he'd watched Ryan twist the company into something unrecognizable. By the time Otis realized what Ryan was doing, it felt too late. The younger Sterling had buried the old ways beneath boardroom bravado and backroom deals. But something had changed. Maybe it was the years of quiet disrespect. Maybe it was hearing executives joke about firing workers who had given their lives to this place. Or maybe it was just time. Otis was 68 years old, and he had run out of reasons to wait. He packed everything away and returned the briefcase to the locker. Not today, but soon. The moment was coming. That afternoon, Otis paused outside the main conference room. Inside, he could hear voices, raised, tense, discussing the company's future, his company. His expression stayed calm, but something in his eyes had awakened. A fire long kept quiet. 3 days later, Sterling Corp buzzed with unease. An email had hit inboxes at dawn. Emergency board meeting. Subject, strategic restructuring and asset management. Everyone knew what that meant. Layoffs. Big ones. Otis stood quietly outside. The glass-walled conference room, wiping down a display case filled with trophies and plaques. Reflections danced across the glass, revealing board members hurrying in. Suits, laptops, coffee in hand, faces tight with worry. Not one of them looked his way. Ryan Sterling arrived last, flanked by his CFO Walter Price and his right-hand man Logan Matthews. Ryan's walk was confident, too confident. He passed Otis like he was part of the furniture. "Is everyone here?" Ryan called out. "Close that, will you?" he told his assistant, pointing to the conference room door. "We don't need maintenance staff eavesdropping on company business." The door shut with a soft click. But Otis wasn't finished. He moved closer to the air vent, a spot he knew from experience carried sound like a funnel into the hallway. Inside, Ryan stood at the head of the long mahogany table, the polished symbol of his control. "Thanks for coming," he began. "You all know last quarter was rough. Our margins are shrinking and shareholders want action." Walter Price handed out folders. "The numbers don't lie," he said in his thin, sharp voice. "We're down 15%. In revenue year over year." Ryan picked up from there, "which is why I've prepared a full restructuring plan." He tapped the folder. Page 3, first phase 20% workforce reduction. Murmurs broke out. Martha Donovan, the longest-serving board member, leaned forward. "That's almost 400 employees." Her voice was stunned. Ryan didn't flinch. "We'll offer basic severance packages and focus on eliminating lower-tier staff, those with the least impact on high-level operations." Otis listened, cloth still in hand. The man they never saw was listening to every word. The very people who built this company, who swept floors, filed documents, answered phones, and ran deliveries, were being reduced to numbers. Again. But this time, they wouldn't be invisible. The man with the mop wasn't just listening anymore. He was preparing, and for the first time in decades, the boardroom was no longer Ryan Sterling's kingdom. It belonged to someone else. And they were about to find out exactly who. 87 jobs, to be exact, Walter added, flipping through his folder. Mostly lower and mid-level positions where we can cut without affecting essential operations. Outside the conference room, Otis's hand paused mid-wipe on the glass trophy case. 387 people, not numbers, people with families, rent to pay, dreams they'd given years, decades to this company, to his company. Back inside, Ryan was already on to the next item. Phase 2 includes offloading underperforming divisions. R&D hasn't produced anything viable in over a year. We'll keep a skeleton crew for appearances, but we're shutting it down. Martha Donovan, who had served on the board since the early days, frowned. Thomas loved that department. He said innovation was the soul of Sterling Corp. Ryan scoffed. My father also thought paying the janitor above market rate was noble because he was a good man. His voice dropped into mocking. Sentiment. Doesn't pay dividends, Martha. A few board members chuckled. Logan Matthews leaned forward, expression tight. We've also uncovered some questionable accounting. Walter and I are working on it. Walter cleared his throat suddenly. Nervous? Yes, well, creative entries, really. Not illegal, but not exactly shareholder-friendly either. Ryan cut in. That's why this restructuring has to happen fast. The first wave of terminations begins next week. Then we liquidate assets. I've spoken to PR. They'll spin it well enough. Otis stood frozen outside, cloth in hand. Every word stung. This wasn't just about numbers. It was a slow erasure of everything Thomas had built. Everything he had helped build. Inside, the board shifted to logistics. Who would break the news? How severance packages would be handled? Which assets to sell first? Ryan added, we can slash the cleaning crew in half. Outsource the heavier stuff. No benefits, less headache. Walter chimed in, flipping another page. That janitor Carter, I think he's way past retirement, still on full benefits. We cut him, we save a bundle. Daddy's favorite pet, Ryan said with a cold grin. I've been meaning to show him the door for years, make it happen. Laughter echoed again. Logan smirked. Might be smart to keep him. He doesn't miss much. Good to have eyes. On the floor, someone else chuckled. Please. The old black janitor? He probably doesn't even understand half of what he hears. Just glad to still have a job at that age. The room went quiet for a beat, then moved on. Outside, Otis stood still. That familiar weight in his chest returned. Present, but invisible. Heard, but never really listened to. A younger man approached. Jake Wilson, a junior accountant, carried stack of reports. He slowed when he saw Otis. They've been in there a while, Jake said, glancing toward the door. Word is big cuts are coming. Otis gave a small nod, folding his cloth carefully. Sounds that way. Jake hesitated, then lowered his voice. I've seen weird numbers in the system. Transfers to strange accounts. Invoices for services that never happened. I tried asking about it, but my supervisor told me to drop it. Before Otis could reply, the conference room door swung open. Logan Matthews stepped out, catching sight of Jake mid-conversation. Don't you have somewhere to be? Logan's voice was sharp. Jake straightened. Yes, sir. I was just bringing these reports for the meeting. Hand them over, Logan said, snatching the files. He paused, eyes narrowing. And in the future, remember, it's not appropriate to chit-chat with maintenance staff during work hours. We pay you to do numbers, not socialize. Jake flushed red but stood his ground. Mr. Carter was helping me clean up a spill by the display. Logan didn't look convinced but didn't push it. Fine. Back to your desk. He turned to Otis. And you, executive restroom. Someone threw up in there earlier. Yes, sir, Otis replied, his voice calm even as fire flickered behind his eyes. As Logan walked off, Jake leaned closer and whispered, "They don't even know your name, do they? Just the janitor or the old black guy?" "That's not right." Otis offered a quiet nod. "Some folks only see what they expect to see, Mr. Wilson." That afternoon, Otis returned to his usual rounds, polishing, mopping, emptying trash. But his thoughts weren't in the work. They were in that conference room, and in a briefcase buried in the bottom of his locker, waiting for the moment he'd stop being invisible and finally be seen. Otis found himself standing outside the fourth-floor records room, a place he'd rarely needed to enter. For a long moment he just stood there, hand on his master key. Then, with quiet resolve, he unlocked the door and stepped into the dim space, surrounded by rows of filing cabinets full of documents too sensitive or too old to have been digitized. Few moved methodically, scanning labels until he found the one he was looking for: Executive Compensation and Benefits 2010-2020. He didn't have much time. Relying on years of knowing the building's rhythms and security blind spots, Otis flipped through the folders quickly, his eyes narrowing as the truth came into focus. Right there in black and white, proof of financial fraud. Executive bonuses, far beyond approved limits. Money secretly pulled from the employee pension fund. Forged board meeting notes authorizing actions that had never taken place. Otis's jaw clenched. His suspicions had just turned into hard evidence. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Otis froze, but it was just Jim, the night security guard. "Oh, Mr. Carter," Jim said, surprised. "Didn't expect anyone in here this late." "Just catching up on some deep cleaning," Otis replied casually, shifting his body slightly to block Jim's view of the table. "Haven't gotten to this room in a while." Jim shrugged, uninterested. "Well, don't work too late. Building's pretty empty now." As soon as Jim left, Otis grabbed his flip phone and snapped a few quick photos of the most damning documents. Then, he placed everything back exactly as he'd found it and exited quietly. He had what he needed. The briefcase in his locker had always been his backup plan. But now, with this new evidence, his case was bulletproof. Tomorrow could wait no longer. It had to be today. At sunrise, Otis arrived early to Sterling Corp., earlier than usual. He walked straight to the employee locker room and opened his locker. There it was, the leather briefcase. Its weight was familiar, but today it felt different, heavier with purpose. He took off his janitor's uniform and slipped into the only suit he owned, bought years ago for his daughter's wedding. It was a little loose and outdated, but it was clean, respectful, dignified. He smoothed his gray hair, straightened his tie, and looked at himself in the mirror inside the locker door. For a moment, he hardly recognized the man staring back. Not because of the clothes, but because of the fierce determination in his eyes. That wasn't a janitor's face. That was the face of a man ready to take back what was his. At exactly 10 a.m., the same time the board of directors was scheduled to meet, Otis walked toward the top floor, briefcase in hand and heart pounding. He moved with purpose. Outside the conference room, Ryan's assistant looked up, confused by the man in a suit walking toward her. "Sir, can I help you?" she asked, clearly unsure of who he was. "The board is in a private meeting. No," Otis replied calmly. "They're expecting me." Before she could respond, he stepped past her and opened the door. Inside, the boardroom fell into stunned silence. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every head turned toward him. Ryan Sterling stared in confusion that quickly twisted into irritation. "Carter, what in the world are you doing here? And what are you wearing?" There were chuckles, murmurs. Someone loudly whispered, "Isn't that the janitor?" Another board member smirked. "Where'd he dig up that suit, 1992? Logan Matthews stood up, puffing his chest. "This is a private meeting. You need to leave. Now." Otis didn't move. He stood tall. "I'm afraid I can't do that. Mr. Matthews, I have something important to add to this conversation about the future of Sterling Corporation." Ryan laughed, looking around for support. "You? What are you going to contribute, Carter? Mop critique?" The laughter grew louder. One exec mimed pushing a mop while another joked about Otis getting lost on the way to the janitor's closet. Is this some kind of protest? Walter Price asked, clearly nervous. Because we can have security down here and I'm not here as a janitor today, Otis said, cutting through the noise. His voice was calm, but unshakable. I'm here as the majority shareholder of Sterling Corporation. Silence fell like a weight over the room. Ryan blinked, stunned. That's ridiculous. This little stunt is going to cost you your job. Logan, call. Before you do that, Otis said, opening his briefcase, I suggest you take a look at this. He reached inside and pulled out a stack of neatly preserved documents, and right on top, signed and sealed, was a certificate, naming him the holder of 51% of the company's shares. The laughter was gone now. In its place, fear. Otis placed the original document, not a copy, right in the center of the table. The Sterling Corp logo was older, from decades ago, and at the bottom was Thomas Sterling's signature, clear, bold, and unmistakable. What is this supposed to be? Ryan demanded, though his voice no longer held the same cocky certainty. This, Otis said calmly, is a certificate for 51% ownership of Sterling Corporation, issued to me by your father 35 years ago. He looked around, the room steady and composed. I stayed quiet all these years out of respect for Thomas and the vision we built together. But after what I heard yesterday, after seeing how far this company has drifted from its roots, my silence ends today. The entire room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Every eye was glued to that worn but powerful document, and to the man who had just turned their world upside down. Ryan stared at the certificate like it was something venomous. This is absurd, he said, voice strained. You can't honestly expect us to believe my father gave majority ownership of his company to a janitor? The way he emphasized the word made his meaning clear. Several board members shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances between Ryan and Otis, who stood tall and unshaken. Not secretly, Mr. Sterling, Otis replied. The transfer was legally registered with the SEC. The records have been held in trust for decades. He laid down more documents on the table, clear, well-kept files. These are the original transfer papers, the trust agreement, the SEC registration. All in proper order. Martha Donovan, the board's longest-serving member, leaned forward and picked up the top page. This looks authentic, she said slowly, her voice full of disbelief. But why? Why would Thomas do this? And why wait 35 years to come forward? Logan Matthews cut in sharply, eyes narrowing. Very convenient now that Thomas is dead and can't confirm or deny anything. Otis didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled a faded photograph from his briefcase and gently placed it on the table. It showed 3 men standing at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Sterling Corp's first. Thomas was in the middle, smiling. A younger Ryan stood to one side, and on the other, Otis. The same photo hung in Ryan's office, except in that version Otis had been cropped out. I met Thomas in 1987, Otis said, voice steady. I was working nights at Wilson's machine shop. He was prototyping his first product designs. I had a degree in mechanical engineering from Howard University, he continued. But at the time, companies weren't exactly knocking down doors to hire black engineers. The air in the room changed. The truth was settling in. Thomas and I talked. I made a few suggestions. Helped him solve a design flaw he'd been stuck on. Ryan's face twisted, disbelief written across it as he listened to a man he thought he knew speak with knowledge that clearly came from more than cleaning floors. Every bank in the city turned him down, Otis continued. Not because his idea was bad, but because he didn't have collateral. He was ready to give up. Otis paused, his gaze steady. That's when I offered him the $30,000 I'd saved to one day start my own business. 30 grand isn't exactly a controlling share of a multi-million-dollar company, Logan sneered. It was in 1988, Martha said softly. Thomas was running on fumes. That money would have meant survival. Otis nodded. Thomas said, Anyone who believed in him enough to risk everything deserved an equal place at the table. He insisted I be a true partner. Walter Price, still skeptical, asked, "But if you owned half the company, why were you pushing a mop all these years?" A gentle, almost sad smile tugged at Otis's mouth. "Because America in 1988 wasn't ready to see a black man as co-founder of a tech company." He took a breath. "Thomas and I both knew that if I was the face of Sterling Corp., investors would pull out, partners would walk, so we agreed. He'd be the face. I'd stay in the background." Ryan scoffed. "So you chose to be the janitor?" "I needed a reason to be here, a role that would let me move around unnoticed. Thomas suggested maintenance, said it'd give me access to every part of the company without raising eyebrows." Otis scanned the room, locking eyes with the executives. You'd be surprised what people say when they think no one important is listening. Several in the room looked down, remembering comments made over the years, crude jokes, careless remarks, things they thought had gone unheard. Otis had heard them all, and now, the man they never really saw had finally been seen. Otis stood tall, his voice steady but filled with quiet emotion. "I thought about coming forward years ago," he said. "But you were Thomas's son, and I wanted to believe you might grow into the kind of leader he hoped you'd be. I waited. I hoped. But instead I've watched you tear down everything he worked for, piece by piece. The innovation, the integrity, the way he respected every single employee. It's all gone." The room fell silent. The weight of Otis's words landed heavy, but Ryan exploded, slamming his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "You expect us to believe my father gave away control of his company to the janitor? And then the two of you just decided to hide it for decades? Do you have any idea how insane that sounds?" "Watch your tone, Ryan," Martha said softly but firmly. "My tone?" Ryan laughed bitterly. "We're in the middle of a major restructuring, and this man walks in with dusty papers and a wild story. And that's what you're worried about?" Walter Price, the CFO, had been flipping through the documents with a furrowed brow. Finally, he spoke up. "These papers, they look real. The signatures match. And this trust, it explains why none of this ever showed up in our usual financial summaries." Ryan wasn't giving up. "Even if those papers were legit once, they've been overridden by our reorganizations. That trust doesn't mean anything anymore." Otis shook his head. "Every time the company restructured, the trust's holdings were carried forward. Your finance department processed those documents. Every time. You just never looked closely enough." Walter's face went pale. "The OT designation? I always thought that was just a legacy code from the early days." Otis nodded. "It was. OT for Otis. It's mine." A hush fell over the boardroom, followed by a swell of chatter as the room broke into overlapping arguments. But through it all, Ryan sat frozen red with humiliation. "Enough," he finally shouted. "Even if this is real, you can't just walk in here and take over. There are rules, protocols." "You're right," Otis said. "As majority shareholder, I can't manage daily operations, but I can call for a vote on major decisions." He paused, letting that sink in. "So, let's begin. I motion to cancel the layoffs and asset sales discussed yesterday." "I second that," Martha said without hesitation. Ryan whipped his head toward her, shocked. "Martha, you can't be serious." She looked at him calmly. "Only someone deeply connected to this company would wait decades to step forward. Only someone who loved Thomas enough to give you the benefit of the doubt, again and again." Then, she turned to Otis. "But why now? Why today?" Otis looked around the room, his voice quiet but firm. "Because yesterday I heard you planning to lay off 400 people. People with families. People who've given their lives to this company. And you talked about it like they were just numbers on a spreadsheet." He took a breath, the fire in his eyes unmistakable. "That's not the company Thomas and I built." Before Ryan could speak, the conference room door opened. A security guard stepped in. "Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Sterling. You pressed the alert?" Ryan pointed at Otis, furious. Yes, remove him now. He's trespassing. The guard, a younger man named David, paused. Sir, is that Mr. Carter? Otis gave a polite nod. It's me, David. I don't think I can remove him, David said slowly. He's not causing a disturbance. The disturbance is his presence, Ryan shouted. He's not allowed in here, Martha stood. If he's the majority shareholder, he has every right to be here. Otis didn't flinch. Instead, he laid one last folder on the table. And then there's this. The room went quiet again. These are financial records, documents showing funds moved into offshore accounts, executive bonuses that were never approved, pensions drained, all backed by your signature, Mr. Sterling. Ryan went pale. Those were authorized. Not all, Walter interrupted, his voice grim. I raised concerns. You brushed them aside. Just then, Jake Wilson stepped into the room, holding more reports. He paused when he saw the scene. Otis standing tall, documents spread out before him, and Ryan Sterling, cornered, exposed, and in that moment, the truth could no longer be denied. Otis gave a quiet nod. Mr. Wilson, I believe you've come across some unusual transactions recently. Jake hesitated, glancing at Logan, whose glare was sharp, then at Ryan, whose eyes held a silent threat. But when he looked back at Otis, the man who had carried himself with grace for years despite being ignored, Jake stood his ground. Yes, sir, he said firmly. I've documented several shady transfers over the past year. Money sent to accounts with no names, all signed off by Mr. Sterling. Ryan jumped to his feet. You're fired, Wilson. Clean out your desk, now. I'm afraid you don't have that authority anymore, Otis said, his voice steady. Given the financial misconduct we've uncovered, I move that Ryan Sterling be suspended as CEO, effective immediately, pending a full audit and investigation. For a second, no one moved. Then, slowly, one hand after another went up around the table. Even Walter, after a brief pause, raised his hand. Only Logan remained, seated, his arms crossed. This is madness, Ryan snapped. You're all making a huge mistake. But it was clear the room had shifted. Ryan stood frozen, watching the power he once held slip away. You can't do this, he whispered. You're just a janitor. Otis held his gaze. I was never just a janitor, Mr. Sterling. I was an owner who chose to clean. By the next morning, the entire building was buzzing. The news had traveled fast. The janitor, quiet, kind Mr. Carter, was actually the majority owner of Sterling Corp. Employees whispered near break rooms, trying to wrap their heads around the truth. Otis arrived at his usual early hour, but this time he wasn't pushing cleaning cart. He wore a simple, neatly pressed suit. As he walked through the lobby, conversations fell silent. People stared, not with judgment, but with something closer to awe. Upstairs, Martha Donovan was already in what used to be Ryan's office, ready to help guide Otis into his new role. We've called an all-staff meeting for 10 a.m., she said. People are confused. They need to hear directly from you. Otis looked around the office, the high-end furniture, the huge windows. It all felt unnecessary. This is a lot, he said. Martha gave a small smile. Ryan believed the CEO's office should make people feel small. Otis shook his head. That's not how I lead, but we've got more important things to handle. Just then, the door burst open. Ryan stormed in, followed by Logan and two lawyers in expensive suits. Well, Ryan sneered. Making yourself comfortable, I see, Otis greeted him calmly. Mr. Sterling, I didn't expect to see you today. Did you really think I'd just vanish? Ryan barked. That I'd walk away from the company my father built? Our company, Otis corrected gently. And no, I didn't expect you to disappear, just to respect the board's decision. Ryan motioned toward the two lawyers. This is Charles Bartlett and James Wilson. They filed an emergency injunction. This morning, we are challenging your ownership. Charles spoke up. We have serious concerns, Mr. Carter. The court has issued a temporary stay pending an investigation. Martha picked up her phone. I'm calling our legal team. No need, said James. We've already been in contact. Otis accepted their business card. Gentlemen, I understand you're doing your job, But my ownership has been legally sound since day one, Ryan scoffed. A janitor owning a multi-million-dollar company? Come on. Otis didn't flinch. My job title doesn't change the truth. But if you want to talk about janitorial work, let's do it. I've spent decades watching this company from the inside out, paying attention to things you ignored. Ryan's face turned red. You've disrupted a public company. You've caused panic over old paperwork. There will be consequences. Martha stepped in. Ryan, this isn't helping. The board voted. Unless the court says otherwise, Mr. Carter is in charge. Logan joined in. This uncertainty will hurt our stock. Is that what you want? Otis met his eyes. The uncertainty started when Ryan turned this company into his personal piggy bank. I plan to end that. Just then, the intercom buzzed. Legal counsel was on the line. Auditors had arrived. Ryan's face twisted with disbelief as Otis took the call calmly, handling it all with quiet confidence. This isn't over, Carter, Ryan growled. My father would be ashamed. Martha cut him off sharply. Ryan, choose your next words very carefully. Ryan paused, then said bitterly, my father would hate to see this company in the hands of someone so unqualified. Let the janitor play CEO, Logan added with a smirk. We'll let the court sort this out. As they turned to leave, Otis called after them. Mr. Sterling, before you go, I'll need your badge and company devices. Standard protocol for suspended employees. Ryan froze, and just like that, the balance of power had finally shifted. Ryan shot Otis a final bitter glare, then slammed his badge and phone on the desk before storming out of the room. Once the door closed behind them, Martha let out a long breath. That was just the beginning, she said quietly. Ryan won't back down without a fight. I never thought he would, Otis replied. But neither will I. The morning carried on. Otis met with the auditors. Professional. Men who clearly hadn't expected to deal with someone like him. He didn't match the image of a typical CEO, and that showed in their eyes. Still, he greeted them respectfully and promised full access to the company's financial records, with Walter Price ready to cooperate fully. As the clock neared the time for the all-staff meeting, Otis felt a twinge of nerves. Public speaking wasn't something he enjoyed, and now he was about to address hundreds of employees, many who had never even noticed him before. The company auditorium was packed. Otis stepped onto the stage, dressed not in coveralls but in a modest dark suit. Conversations hushed as people recognized the familiar face in unfamiliar clothes. Some employees looked puzzled, others intrigued. Among the maintenance staff there were looks of pride, real, raw pride, some even brushing tears from their eyes. Good morning, Otis began. For those of you who don't know me, and I imagine that's most of you, my name is Otis Carter. Until yesterday I was part of the janitorial team here at Sterling Corp. Today I stand before you as the company's majority shareholder and acting CEO. Whispers rippled through the room. Over the next 15 minutes, Otis told his story, his early investment in Sterling Corp., his quiet partnership with Thomas, and his long decision to stay behind the scenes. He spoke honestly about why he finally stepped forward and laid out his first steps, canceling layoffs, launching a full audit, and restoring the company's founding values. I know many of you are wondering what this means for your jobs, he said, his voice steady. Let me be clear. If you're doing good work, you have nothing to fear. Unlike the previous administration, I value everyone here, from the newest intern to the most senior vice president. As he spoke, the room's mood began to shift. The early tension faded. People leaned forward, eyes bright with curiosity. The maintenance team sat a little straighter. Some wiped their eyes. Others nodded, quietly overwhelmed. I've spent years cleaning this building, emptying your trash, mopping your floors, hearing your conversations. I've listened to your frustrations, and I've heard your ideas. Brilliant ideas that were ignored because they came from someone in the wrong role. He looked across the crowd, meeting eyes row by row. Those days are done. Sterling Corp will be a place where your worth is measured by your ideas, not your title. a place where innovation is celebrated and everyone is treated with the dignity they deserve. He paused, and then the room erupted in applause. Not everyone clapped. Logan and his loyalists stayed silent. But most stood to their feet, some clapping slowly, others with energy, relief and hope in their eyes. After the meeting, Otis found himself surrounded. People wanted to shake his hand, thank him, share their stories. It felt strange to be seen. After so long, Jake Wilson made his way through the crowd. "Mr. Carter, that was incredible. You looked like you'd been leading boardrooms your whole life." Otis smiled. "Thank you, Jake. And thank you for standing tall yesterday." "That wasn't easy." Jake glanced around, then leaned in. "It wasn't, but seeing you challenge Ryan gave me the courage I needed." He lowered his voice. "Just so you know, Ryan's not backing down. He's been calling big investors all morning, trying to rally support, before Otis could reply. Noise from the auditorium doors drew their attention. Ryan was back, and he wasn't alone. Several sharply dressed men followed him. "That's Theodore Hamilton and the Westridge Investment Group," Jake whispered. "They control about 15% of the company. Looks like Ryan's trying to pressure the board through shareholders." Martha appeared beside Otis. "They're demanding an emergency meeting." Otis nodded, calm but focused. "Then let's not keep them waiting." As he moved forward, the crowd parted to let him pass. People watched closely now. The fight for the company's future was no longer behind closed doors. It was happening here, in full view of the people it would affect most. "There he is," Ryan said loudly, waving toward Otis. "The janitor who thinks he can run a multi-million-dollar company." He turned to one of the investors with a grin. "Mr. Hamilton, I believe you had some questions about his qualifications?" Theodore Hamilton, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, looked Otis over with open doubt. "Mr. Carter, what exactly makes you think you're qualified to lead this company? Do you have any experience running a business?" The question was meant to humiliate. But Otis had spent a lifetime being underestimated. He'd earned advanced degrees in night school and had quietly studied every corner of Sterling Corp for decades. "Mr. Hamilton, I understand your concern," Otis answered calmly. "So let me ask you something. Under Ryan Sterling's leadership, how has your investment performed over the last 5 years?" Hamilton hesitated. "Below expectations," he admitted. "And are you aware that in that same period, executive compensation rose by 47% while the average employee's salary barely moved? Just 2%? Or that the R&D budget was slashed by 30%? Otis stood firm, his voice strong. "I may have held a mop, Mr. Hamilton, but I had a front-row seat to every decision made here. I know this company, its strengths, its flaws, and the future it could have. And unlike some, I'm not chasing short-term profits that destroy long-term value." "Nice speech," Ryan snapped. "But business isn't about emotion. It's about results. Our stock's already dropped 7% today. How much lower before you admit this experiment is failing?" Otis didn't even blink. "The market responds to headlines, Mr. Sterling. But in time, it rewards value, trust, and strong leadership, all of which have been lacking around here." He looked at the crowd around them. "I'm not focused on what the stock does tomorrow. I'm focused on where Sterling Corp will be 5-10 years from now." He turned to the investors. "Join me in the boardroom. I'll lay out my vision, share the full financial picture, including what the audit will reveal. And then you'll see, this change isn't just right, it's overdue." Otis walked toward the elevator, investors following close behind. He caught a glimpse of Ryan's face, still furious, but now with a flicker of fear. The story Ryan had spun, that Otis would fall apart under pressure, wasn't coming true. The power struggle wasn't over, but the balance had begun to shift. 3 days later, Sterling Corp was deep in a corporate battle. The initial shock was gone. Now there were 2 clear sides, and Otis was preparing for the next move. He sat at the head of the boardroom table reviewing new audit reports. Martha Donovan and Jake Wilson sat beside him, reading with tight jaws. "This is worse than we thought," Martha said, tapping the page. "There's real fraud here. Faked board votes, hidden money, offshore accounts. Ryan wasn't just greedy. He was stealing from this company's future. Jake nodded. The R&D cuts weren't even about saving money. That funding was rerouted into fake companies that trace right back to Ryan's personal accounts. Otis looked up. Who else knew? Walter Price did, Jake answered. His name's on most of the transfers, and Logan Matthews shows. Up connected to the shell companies, but the rest of the board? Looks like Ryan kept them in the dark. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Carter, the department heads are waiting. We're on our way, Otis replied. He gathered the documents and slid them into a folder. Let's keep this close for now, he told them. We need more solid proof before going public. As they walked down the hall toward the large conference room, Martha updated him. Ryan's not slowing down. He's filed more legal paperwork. He's meeting with big clients, warning them the company's falling apart under your leadership. Any of them believe it? Some are nervous, she said, but most are holding off. The bigger problem is inside. Ryan still has pull with some of the top brass, people scared of change or worried they're tied to his mess. They reached the conference room. 15 department heads waited inside, sitting stiffly. Everyone knew this meeting was about change. Otis stepped to the front. Good morning, he began. As you know, Sterling Corp is at a turning point. We've uncovered serious issues, mismanagement, dishonesty. But we've also found something else, a spark, a chance to rebuild the right way. He paused and scanned the room. My vision is simple. A company where innovation is encouraged, where employees are respected, and where every dollar is earned with integrity. Heads began to nod slowly. Then he laid out the specifics. Effective. Immediately, I'm putting a few changes into place. First, all executive bonuses are suspended until this audit is complete. The planned layoffs are officially canceled, Otis said clearly. Instead, we'll be reassigning staff to strengthen our R&D department, which will have its full budget restored. Around the table, reactions varied. Some looked relieved, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Patricia Wilson, the HR director who had been handling the layoff process, slowly raised her hand. Her voice, smooth but skeptical, cut the air. Mr. Carter, while I admire your intentions, these changes don't seem financially sustainable. The layoffs were meant to keep the company afloat. Otis didn't flinch. Were they really? He asked, sliding some printed reports across the table. Or were they meant to protect the overinflated executive pay that's drained our budget? The numbers didn't lie. Sterling Corp wasn't failing. It had been mismanaged. Patricia's lips tightened, but she didn't respond. Others weren't so quiet. This is insane, said Richard Evans, the head of operations and one of Ryan's loyal allies. You've been CEO for less than a week, and now you're undoing plans that took months to build? Just because you technically own shares doesn't mean you know how to run a modern company. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to Otis, waiting to see how he would handle the challenge. Otis met Evans's stare without blinking. Mr. Evans, I've spent 35 years watching this company from the ground floor. I've seen what works and what doesn't. I've seen great ideas tossed aside because they came from the wrong floor or the wrong person. I've seen smart people walk away because they weren't heard. He paused. But most of all, I've learned that having a title doesn't make someone wise, and being without one doesn't make someone foolish. That's a lesson I think we could all benefit from. Evans turned red but said nothing more. A few department heads smirked behind their hands. Otis went on. I want every department to submit a full report, honest and unfiltered, not the sugar-coated versions you gave to Ryan. I want to know what's broken, what's working, and what you really need to do your jobs well. As the meeting wrapped up, Otis asked Jake and the head of IT to stay behind. Once the others had left, Otis turned to Michael Morris, the IT director. Mr. Morris, I need your help with something sensitive, Otis said. We believe important data may have been tampered with. I need your team to lock down our servers and try to recover anything that's been erased, especially files that could prove financial misconduct. Morris frowned. Actually, last week Mr. Matthews asked me to delete some executive files. He said it was just part of routine maintenance. It felt off, so I held off. Jake leaned in. That was probably a cover, an attempt to destroy the evidence. Can you get it back? Otis asked. If they didn't use advanced scrubbing software, yes. We keep backups. I'll make this a top priority and keep it under wraps. Before they could leave, Otis's assistant rushed in. Mr. Carter, something's happening in the lobby. Ryan's back with a news crew. He's giving some kind of public statement. They headed down quickly. When they reached the lobby, they found Ryan in the middle of a circle of cameras, flashing lights and reporters. Employees stood around, watching with growing concern. This is a corporate disaster, Ryan said loudly. An unqualified man has seized control through shady tactics, risking hundreds of jobs and millions in investments. Otis stepped forward. Ryan's gaze locked. With his end, for a moment he hesitated, then smiled like a man ready to perform. Ah, Ryan said, turning to the cameras. Here's the janitor who thinks he can run a tech company. Mr. Carter, care to explain how mopping floors qualifies you to lead a corporation? Cameras turned. The room went still. Otis stood tall, calm as ever. He saw the trap. Ryan wanted him to get emotional, to seem bitter or lost. Instead, Otis smiled politely. Mr. Sterling, he said, I'd be happy to talk about my qualifications. I hold an engineering degree from Howard University, and I've spent 35 years studying this company, its people, its systems, its problems. He let the words sink in before continuing. But the real question is, why are you choosing to stir up bad press for your own company, instead of answering for the serious financial issues you left behind? Ryan's grin faltered. That's nonsense, Ryan said. The real story is a hostile takeover, led by someone who's never run a business and whose only claim is some dusty old paperwork. Otis stepped forward. That paperwork has been verified by corporate counsel. As for my ability, let's start with this. Those 400 workers you plan to fire, they're keeping their jobs under my leadership. Gasps and soft cheers rippled through the employees nearby. Some clapped quietly. Ryan's face tightened. They'll lose those jobs anyway, Ryan snapped, trying to recover. Just wait. But his voice didn't carry the same confidence anymore. The momentum had shifted. Otis stood firm, the cameras still watching, but his eyes only on the people, the ones who mattered, the ones who finally saw him. Would you like me to continue with the next part of Otis's restructuring, or the final outcome of the power struggle? When the company crashes under amateur leadership, Ryan snapped, don't say I didn't warn you. Maybe that's the point, though. Maybe you care more about revenge than actually leading. Otis stood firm. The only one hurting. This company right now is the man dragging camera crews into our lobby to throw public tantrums and toss around baseless accusations. Security personnel stepped forward. The message was clear. This impromptu press stunt was over. Ryan's face tightened as he realized his trap hadn't worked. Otis had refused to rise to the bait. This isn't over, Carter, Ryan muttered under his breath as the cameras turned away. You may have won this round, but you've made enemies, powerful ones, and they don't like seeing their corporate ladder climbed by a man who used to scrub their toilets. Otis looked him in the eye, calm and steady. I've spent my entire life dealing with powerful men who underestimated me. I'm still standing, and now, for the first time, I'm being seen. As Ryan left, scattered clapping began. Then it grew, louder, stronger. It wasn't just support, it was respect. Otis had faced public ridicule and responded with grace. Ryan's attack had backfired, but that moment of triumph didn't last long. Later that afternoon, just as Otis was finishing a strategy meeting with the R&D team, Jake rushed in, breathless. We've got a serious problem, he blurted. Ryan's gone nuclear. Otis straightened. What's happened? Jake didn't waste time. He used his banking connections to freeze the company's accounts. Everything. Payroll, vendor payments, operational funds. We're locked out. Martha stepped in, her face tense. And it gets worse. Logan's been calling employees directly, trying to lure them away. He's helping Ryan start a new company and trying to take our top people with him. Otis took it all in. Ryan was willing to sabotage hundreds of employees just to claw his way back into power. "What are our options?" Otis asked. "We can challenge the freeze in court," Martha replied, "but that could take weeks. And if we can't access funds," Jake added, "we can't guarantee people will get paid. That's what's making everyone panic." Otis didn't hesitate. "Call an emergency company-wide meeting, 30 minutes, and get me Walter Price. If he wants any chance at saving face after this audit, this is the moment to step up." 30 minutes later, the auditorium was filled wall to wall. The energy was thick, part worry, part fear. Rumors had spread fast. People were scared. Otis stepped onto the stage flanked by Martha, Jake, and, surprisingly, Walter Price, who looked shaken but resolute. "By now," Otis began, "most of you have heard that Ryan Sterling has taken the shocking step of freezing our company's financial accounts. It's a reckless move that puts all of us, your families, your jobs, at risk." He didn't sugarcoat it. Otis laid out the facts plainly. The freeze, the legal response, how long things might take. "I know your number one question," will you be paid?" He paused. "Yes, absolutely, yes. Mr. Price is working directly with our banking partners to create emergency operating accounts. And I've personally provided collateral to guarantee payroll won't be interrupted." There was a moment of stunned silence, then a collective exhale. Relief rippled through the room. Otis continued. "Some of you have received calls from Logan Matthews, promises of a safe exit. But I want to be clear, Sterling Corp is not sinking, it's changing. And those of you who stay, who help rebuild this company the right way, will be rewarded and recognized for your loyalty." Then, to everyone's surprise, Walter Price stepped up. "I worked side by side with Ryan Sterling for years," Walter admitted, his voice shaky but clear. "And I helped cover up more than I should have, but freezing those accounts, trying to scare good people into leaving, that tells you exactly where his loyalty lies. Not with you." A deep, uneasy silence fell. People hadn't expected that kind of truth from Walter. But now they knew where he stood. As the crowd filed out, the energy had shifted. What had started as fear had turned into quiet strength. Ryan's sabotage had only pushed the employees closer together, but the battle wasn't over. That evening, as Otis packed up for the night, Jake appeared in his office doorway, his face pale. "Security just called," Jake said. "Someone broke into the server room, bypassed multiple security levels." Otis stood up fast. "The audit files? Backups are safe," Jake reassured him. "But they accessed the live servers, and given the timing, it was probably Ryan." Otis didn't say anything. He just looked out the office window, his jaw set. The war wasn't over. It had just gone digital. "Ryan." Otis nodded. "Or someone acting on his behalf." "What would his angle be?" Martha asked as she stepped in beside them. "Information. Warfare," she offered. "Anything he can use to embarrass the company, discredit your leadership, or maybe even blackmail those who've switched sides." Otis's phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Carter." Ryan's voice came through smooth and smug. "I hope today's little financial hiccup got your attention." Otis didn't flinch. "It confirmed something I already knew. Your character." Ryan chuckled darkly. "Character? From the man who pretended for decades that he was just a janitor while secretly holding control of a company? That's rich. What do you want, Ryan? I'm offering you a way out, a generous one considering everything." "I'm listening." $15 million, Ryan said plainly. "Cash, tax-free, offshore. You sign over your shares, disappear, and live the good life. That's freedom, Mr. Carter. Real freedom, for a man who spent his life cleaning up after others." Otis didn't answer. He let the offer hang. Let Ryan sweat. Then he spoke, voice calm but full of quiet power. "There was a time I had nothing. Just a degree from Howard no one would honor, and a few thousand I scraped together by saving every penny. I gave all of it to your father. Not for profit, but because I believed in him. He gave me partnership when no one else would even give me respect. He paused. So let me make something very clear, Mr. Sterling. No amount of money, not 15 million, not 15 billion, could ever convince me to betray the legacy Thomas Sterling built, or walk away from the people who helped build it with him. You'll regret this, Ryan hissed, his voice cracking. You have no idea what's coming. Otis didn't blink. On the contrary, I know exactly what's coming. Justice. Next morning, Otis stepped into the building and stopped. The lobby was packed with employees, not protesting him, but supporting him. They held signs. We stand with Otis. Dignity over dollars. Ethics over greed. People shook his hand. Some hugged him. One woman teared up just thanking him. Jake joined him at the elevator. It's all over the internet, he said. The hashtag #JanitorToCEO is trending. People are sharing their own stories. Discrimination. Being overlooked, being invisible. You've become more than a CEO, Mr. Carter. You're a symbol. Otis sighed. That's not what I wanted. This was never supposed to be about me. But now it is, Jake replied. You're the story. A qualified engineer, overlooked because of race, working as a janitor for decades, until he finally took back what was his. When they reached the executive floor, Martha was waiting. Phone pressed to her ear, she ended her call as they approached. The account freeze is working through the courts, she reported. But here's the bigger issue. Ryan scheduled a press conference for noon. Word is he's planning to release stolen server files. Otis stayed composed. Let's assume the worst. What could he reveal? Jake stepped forward. Actually, something strange came up last night. I've been working with Michael Morris from IT. He held up a flash drive. Whoever accessed our servers didn't just take files. They left something behind. A hidden program. It was set to corrupt everything on command. A kill switch? Martha asked, shocked. Jake nodded. Michael caught it just in time. More importantly, he traced it back. The code was built and installed on Logan Matthews's laptop. That's sabotage, Martha said, stunned. That's a federal offense. Jake's voice was steady. And we have the proof. Otis's expression hardened. Enough playing defense. Send the data to our legal team. Martha, call the authorities. This isn't just office politics anymore. This is criminal. Within hours, the building buzzed. Whispers traveled like wildfire. Agents were on the way. At noon, Ryan's press conference was mysteriously delayed. By 2:00 p.m., it was canceled altogether. Otis was in a department head meeting when his assistant interrupted. Sir, the FBI is in the lobby. And Logan Matthews was just arrested trying to leave the building. Otis calmly stood. In the lobby, employees stood silent as Logan, in cuffs, was led past them into a waiting vehicle. Two agents approached Otis. Mr. Carter, one said, I'm Special Agent Simmons with the FBI's Cybercrime Division. We'd like to speak with you about the server breach and the evidence you submitted. Otis nodded. Of course, Agent. Let's talk. Let's talk in my office, Otis said. As they stepped into the elevator, Jake rushed over, holding out his tablet. Mr. Carter, you need to see this. On the screen, a breaking headline blazed. Ryan Sterling, former CEO of Sterling Corp., arrested on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. Below it, a photo showed Ryan being led out of his penthouse in cuffs, his face twisted in disbelief and rage. Well, Martha said, that was fast. Agent Simmons gave a small nod. We've actually been building a case for months. Whistleblower reports flagged financial misconduct. What you provided about the server breach, that sealed it. Jake blinked. Wait, whistleblowers? Who reported him? The agent glanced briefly at Otis. That's confidential, but let's just say the investigation didn't start this week. Martha and Jake exchanged looks. The message was clear. Otis hadn't just stumbled into power. He had been preparing, quietly and carefully, long before anyone saw it coming. Later that afternoon, after the federal agents had left and the building began to settle, Otis found a moment of quiet in his office. The day had been overwhelming. News reports ran non-stop about Ryan's arrest, and the shockwaves were being felt across the business world. A soft knock broke the silence. It was Jake. "You were the whistleblower, weren't you?" he asked. No hesitation. "You've been tracking Ryan's corruption for years." Otis didn't answer directly, but the small smile on his face said enough. "All those years," Jake continued, "you weren't just mopping floors. You were watching, listening, collecting evidence. You let them think you were invisible." Otis looked up. "Being invisible means you hear things people don't want you to hear, see things they try to hide. It's only powerless if you never use it." Before Jake could respond, Otis's assistant walked in. "The board is assembled, sir. They're waiting in the main conference room." Otis nodded and stood. Inside, the boardroom was tense. A few chairs sat empty. Ryan's closest allies either resigned or already caught in the fallout. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Otis began, standing at the head of the table. "As you know, today changed everything. Ryan Sterling, along with several others, has been arrested. The charges are serious and deserved." He paused to let the weight of it settle. "Our company has taken a hit. That's the truth. But with honesty, we can rebuild stronger. This is our chance to lead with transparency and clean house." Otis laid out his next steps: full cooperation with law enforcement, stronger financial safeguards, and a commitment to make things right for everyone affected. That included shareholders and employees whose pension funds had been misused. "But most of all," Otis said, "we need to earn back trust from our clients, from our community, from each other. If we do business the right way, if we hold ourselves accountable, Sterling Corp can finally become what Thomas and I dreamed it could be." As the meeting ended and the room began to clear, Martha lingered. She studied Otis quietly. "You know, when you walked into that boardroom last week, I thought Ryan was right. I thought this was all some weird scam. I didn't believe it. I couldn't imagine the janitor I'd barely noticed being the owner of this company." Otis smiled. "Most people couldn't, that's how I stayed invisible. But now," Martha said, "I can't imagine anyone better to lead us forward. You know this company better than any of us. You've seen its flaws, its people, its heart." She held out her hand. "I'm proud to work beside you, Mr. Carter." Otis shook her hand with steady warmth. "Thank you, Martha. And please, just call me Otis. After everything we've been through, I think we've earned that." Outside, evening settled over the city. Otis sat alone in the office that once belonged to Ryan Sterling, and before him, to Thomas Sterling. On the wall hung the familiar photo of Thomas and Ryan at the company's ribbon-cutting ceremony. The TU version that had carefully cropped Otis out. Quietly, he took it down. He opened a drawer and replaced it with the original, Thomas in the middle, flanked by both Ryan and Otis. The full picture. The truth finally out in the open. It was a small act, but one that meant everything. For years, he had been erased. Now, he was finally seen. 2 months had passed since Ryan's arrest, and Sterling Corporation was still picking up the pieces. The excitement of Otis's rise had given way to the tough reality of rebuilding, of facing just how much damage had been done over the years. Otis now worked from what everyone simply called the CEO's office. Gone were the gold fixtures and intimidating decor. He had swapped the oversized desk and wall of awards for a warmer, more open space. The company museum in the lobby now housed all the past accolades. This office? It was meant for conversation, not power trips. There was a soft knock. Martha stepped in, followed by Jake and a few other core leaders who made up Otis's new team. "The quarterly numbers are in," Martha said, handing out folders. Her expression was careful, measured. Otis flipped open his copy. Revenue was still down, 12% lower than last year. The stock price hadn't bounced back. But there was something else. Employee retention was up. So was productivity. David Williams, the new CFO, spoke first. "The market's still wary. They're reacting to the past, not the present. But our foundation is stronger. We've cut waste, we're investing again in R&D, and employee satisfaction is the highest it's been in 10 years. Otis nodded. "We always knew this wasn't going to be fast. Ryan didn't break this company overnight. We're not going to fix it overnight either. He turned to Jake. How's the new talent program coming? Jake, now director of strategy and innovation, grinned. Honestly, it's taken off. We've had a wave of applications from top candidates. They're inspired by what you represent, the Janitor CEO. And we've already rehired 12 of the folks Ryan let go. Patricia Wilson added. They've been essential. Their experience has really helped stabilize things. I'll admit, I didn't think it would work at first. But your leadership, it's changed everything. Otis looked around the table. What's the update on the pension restitution plan? David responded quickly. On track. We've identified every employee who lost retirement funds under Ryan's watch. The first round of payments starts next week. It's tight on our cash flow, but it's the right thing to do. Otis nodded firmly. This company was built by its people, all of them, from executives to janitors. Making things right for them isn't optional. It's our responsibility. The meeting rolled on. Engineering shared progress on 3 promising product lines that had been ignored under the old regime. Marketing unveiled a new campaign focused on transparency and innovation. Legal gave updates on the charges against Ryan's inner circle, most of whom had taken plea deals in exchange for their testimony. As the meeting wound down, Otis raised a hand. One last thing before we go, he said, voice steady. I know. Some of you are feeling pressure, from shareholders, from the board. People want quick wins, fast profits. Some are even whispering about selling. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each of them. Let me be absolutely clear. Sterling Corp is not for sale. We are not going to cut corners just to please investors. We are not going to trade our future for a quick buck. The road we're on isn't the easiest, but it's the right one, and I'm asking you to keep walking it with me. One by one, his team filed out. Martha lingered. She looked at him thoughtfully for a moment. You know, she said, Thomas Sterling used to say something similar, that the right road is almost never the shortest one. She paused, then smiled. You remind me more of him than Ryan ever did. Otis smiled at Martha's comparison. Thomas was the visionary. I'm just doing my best to honor what we built together. You're doing more than that, she replied. You're changing this place. People want to be here again. They feel heard. They feel seen. She paused, then added with a small grin. Though I still think you should let the maintenance crew clean your office. It's a little strange seeing the CEO take out his own trash. Otis chuckled. Old habits. And besides, I like checking in with my former team. They still catch things the rest of us miss. That afternoon, Otis walked past the executive lounge, now converted into a shared meeting space, and made his way to the main employee cafeteria. Twice a week, he made it a point to eat there, sitting with different teams, listening directly to the people shaping the company's future. Today, he joined a table of engineers from the newly revived R&D department. At first, they looked surprised to see him, but that didn't last long. Otis asked questions, good ones, about their current work. Real interest, not just small talk. I can't believe you understand the specs so well, said Sarah Johnson, a senior engineer. Most execs just nod at the simplified versions we hand them, Otis smiled. I did earn an engineering degree from Howard, and I've had 35 years of listening in while cleaning labs. You pick up more than you'd think when people forget you're in the room. Well, we definitely see you now, another engineer added. It means a lot knowing the CEO actually understands what we're working toward. After lunch, Otis took a detour through the basement, home to the maintenance department. He could have called for a meeting, but that wasn't his style. He liked seeing things as they were. To the team down there, Otis wasn't just the man in charge. He was Otis, their old colleague who hadn't forgotten their names or their stories. How's the new gear holding up, Frank? He asked, pointing to the recently delivered floor polishers and vacuums. Frank grinned. Like a dream, Mr. Carter. Twice the speed, half the back pain. We can't thank you enough. It should have been done a long time ago, Otis said. Tools that protect your body aren't luxuries, they're basics. He looked around. The space had better lighting now, real ventilation, and a clean break area. Anything else we need to address? Frank hesitated. Well, a few folks wanted to know about that education assistance program you mentioned. Is that really happening? Otis nodded. Board approved it yesterday. Anyone who wants to go back to school, whether it's college or trade, gets support. Tuition help, flexible hours, all of it. He smiled gently. We might have more engineers hiding in this department than we realize. Later, as the sun dipped low, Otis found himself walking to a place that held deep meaning for him, the original research lab, the same room where Thomas Sterling developed the company's first big breakthrough. Now it stood preserved, like a time capsule. Same benches, same tools. Even some of Thomas's handwritten notes remained under glass. Otis paused at the doorway, memory washing over him. He could still hear Thomas's voice, could see him. Sleeves rolled up, full of energy, explaining some new design idea while Otis swept the floor and quietly offered input. Those long nights had never felt like work. I figured I'd find. You here? Came a soft voice. Otis turned to see James Harrison, an older man in a faded suit, frail now but still sharp, a founding board member, and Thomas's lifelong friend. Otis nodded. Just spending time with old ghosts. James stepped beside him. Thomas would be proud, not just of how you saved this place, but of how long you waited. You showed more patience than I ever could have. It was a different world back then, Otis said softly. And then, I guess it just became easier to stay quiet. Habit, maybe. Well, I'm glad you finally spoke up. James looked around the room. Thomas always said his greatest invention wasn't a product. It was this company, a place that had a soul. Ryan almost destroyed that. But you're bringing it back. Before Otis could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from Jake. Turn. On Channel 6. Now. Heart tightening, Otis stepped quickly into the nearest conference room and flipped on the TV. And there it was. Ryan Sterling's face filled the screen, eyes flashing with fury as he was led out of his penthouse in handcuffs. The anchor's voice explained. Breaking news. Former CEO Ryan Sterling has been released on bail pending trial. And in a surprising turn of events, former Sterling Corp CEO Ryan Sterling held a press conference earlier today. The screen cut to footage of Ryan outside the courthouse. He looked thinner, maybe more tired, but that smug confidence hadn't faded. The charges against me are nothing more than lies, he said, standing stiffly in front of reporters. This is all part of a scheme, a calculated takeover by people who twisted legal loopholes to steal the company my father built. I plan to clear my name and take back what's rightfully mine. Otis watched silently, unmoved. Ryan was doing what Ryan did best, flipping the script, painting himself as the victim while avoiding the truth. As the segment ended, Otis realized he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Jake, Martha, and several others from his team, their faces tight with concern. He's still dangerous, Martha said quietly. Even under indictment, he has influence, and he's desperate. Jake nodded. The plea deals his partners took only put more heat on him. That's going to make him reckless. Otis nodded, absorbing their worry. Increase security across all systems and entrances. But we keep moving forward. Ryan's fighting for his freedom now, not the company. He's already let go. That night, after most of the building had gone quiet, Otis stayed behind in his office. He was reviewing plans for a new employee ownership program, his most ambitious idea yet. The goal? Give every single employee, from interns to janitors, a chance to earn shares in the company. Their loyalty, their work, it deserved to mean something more. A soft ding on his computer caught his eye. Subject line. From Thomas Sterling's archives. Otis leaned closer. It was an email from Harrison, the longtime board member and Thomas's old friend, sent after their visit to the research lab. Attached was a scanned letter. The sender? Thomas. Otis opened it slowly, heart pounding. My dear friend Otis, if you're reading this, I'm no longer around to say these words to your face. I've asked James to hold on to this letter until the day you finally step into your rightful role at Sterling Corp. I understand why you waited. The world wasn't ready when we started. Maybe it still isn't. But this company was always meant to prove something, that doing the right thing and doing good business don't have to be opposites, that people matter more than profit margins. I've watched Ryan over the years. He has my name, but not my heart. He sees this company as a way to gain power, not as the force for good we dreamed of. That's why I never changed our ownership agreement. I always believed the day would come when you'd be ready to step forward and lead with the wisdom this place so badly needs. You've seen Sterling Corp from every angle, literally from the ground up. No MBA can teach the perspective you've earned. So when you take your place, know you have not just my blessing, but my deep gratitude. Our company will finally have the leader it deserves. Your friend always. Thomas Otis leaned back, eyes glassy. He hadn't been seeking approval, but something about hearing Thomas's voice again, even in ink, hit harder than he expected. With renewed clarity, he turned back to the ownership plan. There was still so much work to do. But now, more than ever, he knew they were on the right path. 1 year later, Sterling Corp looked like a different place. Employees gathered in the newly renovated central atrium. Where the space had once been cold and sterile, built to impress outsiders, it now felt like a place for people, a place to connect, to belong. Chairs filled the room, with standing space around the edges. The air buzzed with conversation and laughter. On the big screen behind the stage, a slideshow played. Moments from the company's journey, old photos of Thomas and Otis working side by side, the early prototypes, team celebrations, and community projects. Right at noon, Martha Donovan stepped onto the stage and took the mic. The chatter faded. "Good afternoon, Sterling family," she began, using the word that had become more than just a nickname. It had become a truth. "Thank you for joining us for this important moment. Today marks 1 year since our company began a transformation. Not just in leadership, but in purpose. We've moved from a corporation chasing numbers to a community driven by values, innovation, respect, and the belief that everyone's contribution matters." She smiled, then gestured to the side of the stage. "Please welcome our CEO and majority owner, Mr. Otis Carter." The room erupted in applause as Otis stepped onto the stage. He didn't just look different from the man who once pushed a mop through these halls. He stood different. Wearing a sharp, tailored suit and standing tall, Otis carried the quiet authority of a man who had earned every step forward. And yet beneath the polish, his humility still shone through. "Thank you, Martha. And thank you, all of you," Otis began, waiting for the applause to settle. "Exactly 1 year ago, I walked into a boardroom where I had once only emptied trash cans, and I told the truth about who I really was, the owner of this company." Laughter rippled through the audience, soft and warm. "People remembered that day. A lot of people doubted me," he continued. "They said, 'What does a janitor know about running a company?' Especially an old black janitor who'd never had a seat at the executive table. Some predicted we'd collapse within months. Others were sure I'd sell the place to the highest bidder and vanish." Otis paused, then smiled. "Well, turns out those predictions were a little early." The crowd laughed again as Jake Wilson stepped forward and directed the audience's attention to the large screen. A chart appeared, Sterling Corp's performance metrics over the last 12 months. "Our first quarter was rough," Otis admitted. "But not only did we steady the ship, we started to grow." He pointed to the numbers. "Revenue is up 8% in the last 6 months. Our stock has returned to pre-crisis levels. Employee retention is the highest it's been in a decade. And, maybe most meaningful, our innovation pipeline is the strongest it's been since Thomas Sterling led this company." The screen changed again, now showing photos of recent product launches and community initiatives. "But numbers only tell one side of the story," Otis said, his tone turning sincere. "What matters more is who we've become. A company where the janitor gets the same respect as the VP. A place where no one's ideas are tossed out just because of where they sit. Where people, not profits, are the true priority." He stepped away from the podium and walked closer to the crowd, speaking from the heart. "I saw things you miss from the top floor," he said. "Ideas shut down because they came from the wrong department. Talented people overlooked because they didn't fit someone's idea of what a leader should look like. Decisions made to meet quarterly goals, not to build a better future." Otis glanced around the space, the newly remodeled atrium, once cold and corporate, now full of light and laughter. "Look at us now. We're not perfect. We still have work to do. But together we're building something real, something worthy of the vision Thomas Sterling and I shared all those years ago." The crowd rose to their feet in spontaneous applause. Some clapped, others wiped away tears. When the cheers faded, Otis raised his hand gently. "And today, I'm honored to share the next steps in our journey." He outlined several bold new initiatives. First, the Employee Ownership Program, which would allow workers at all levels to earn real shares in the company they helped build. Then came the Sterling Carter Foundation, which would fund scholarships for minority students pursuing STEM careers. Finally, he unveiled plans for a new campus, one with affordable housing and community resources for the neighborhood. "But the announcement I'm most excited about," Otis added with a sparkle in his eye, "is for the team that started this journey with me, the maintenance staff." He motioned to Frank, the longtime maintenance supervisor, who stepped onto the stage to loud applause. "Starting today," Otis said, "every member of our maintenance department will receive a 20% raise, bringing their pay in line with the best in the industry. And they'll be among the first to access our education support program, with flexible schedules to support their learning goals." Frank's eyes filled with emotion as he shook Otis's hand. The applause was thunderous. "Because you never know," Otis said softly, looking out over the crowd. "Which janitor might just be the next great leader, waiting for a chance." The formal program ended, and employees spilled into a catered reception. But Otis quietly slipped away to his office. After a year like this, he needed a moment alone. So much had happened. Ryan Sterling's trial had ended 3 months earlier. He'd been convicted on multiple counts of financial fraud and corporate misconduct. Now, he was serving a 7-year sentence. His power, his reputation, his empire, all gone. Several of his former allies had received reduced sentences in exchange for their cooperation. Others avoided jail, but only by paying millions in restitution. Otis took no joy in any of that, just a quiet sense of justice for the people who had been ignored, lied to, and used. A soft knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. Jake stepped in, accompanied by a young woman Otis recognized, Rebecca, a recent hire in the maintenance department. "Sorry to bother you, sir," Jake said, smiling, "but Rebecca here, she wanted to speak with you privately." Otis stood, offering a warm nod. "Of course. Come in." What happened next would stay with him forever. Rebecca stepped forward, nervous but determined, a folder clutched tightly in her hands. "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "I started on the night cleaning crew 4 months ago. Last week, I applied for the Education Assistance Program to finish my computer science degree." She opened the folder, revealing an official letter. "They approved it yesterday. I never thought something like this would be possible." Otis smiled, warm and genuine. "That's exactly why we built that program, Rebecca. I'm so proud of you." "There's more," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I told my supervisor I was interested in software development, and instead of brushing me off, he introduced me to the head of engineering. Starting next week, I'll be shadowing the dev team, 1 day a week while I'm in school. I'll get to learn on the job." The pride in her voice hit something deep in Otis. He remembered being her age, remembered having dreams too, dreams that were delayed, ignored, or outright denied because of who he was and where he came from. But Rebecca's experience, it was different, and that difference mattered. "That's the kind of company we're building," Otis said softly. "A place where talent rises, no matter where it starts." Rebecca beamed. And after she left, still glowing with excitement, Jake stayed behind. "You know, Jake said, hands in his pockets. I've been meaning to ask. Now that the company's back on solid ground, and you've proven yourself beyond a shadow of a doubt, have you thought about retiring? Enjoying the fruits of your labor? Otis let out a quiet laugh. Retire? Jake, I spent 35 years waiting just to start this job. I'm not going anywhere. Later that evening, long after most people had left, Otis took his usual walk through the building. It was a habit from his janitor days, a chance to think, to observe, to feel the heartbeat of the place. He stopped in the lobby where a new installation caught his eye. A glass display case. Inside it, his old janitor's uniform, cleaned, pressed, and carefully preserved. Next to it, a plaque read, "Never judge a person's potential by their position. The most powerful voices often belong to those we fail to hear." Otis stood in silence. He looked at the faded name tag, the worn elbows, and the tiny hand-sewn repairs. Every stitch carried a story of dignity in quiet work, a story of being unseen but never unworthy. Then he looked up. Around him stood the company he helped build, no longer defined by greed or hierarchy, but by vision, integrity, and heart. And in that moment, Otis understood something. It was never really about mopping floors. It had always been about cleaning something deeper, what was broken in the system, what was cracked in people's assumptions, what had been stained by years of injustice. In that way, maybe he had never stopped being a janitor. With quiet satisfaction, Otis turned and headed for the exit. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dreams to fight for, new people to uplift, because the journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. As he stepped into the night air, he looked back at the Sterling Corp logo glowing against the dark sky. And just below it, newly, etched in smaller, proud letters, were the words founded by Thomas Sterling and Otis Carter, 1988, Otis's name, finally in the light. Not just as the company's savior, but as its creator. The circle was complete. Justice, delayed for decades, had finally been served. How many people do we pass by without seeing their true worth? Otis Carter's rise from invisible janitor to company owner isn't just a story. It's a reminder. Never underestimate the quiet ones. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and tell us, who's the Otis Carter in your life? Because more stories of hidden power and unexpected triumph are coming soon.